It started with a flicker. Just a quick flash of something metallic, barely noticeable through the dusty plexiglass of a single-engine Cessna, flying 8,000 feet above Yosemite's northeast high country. Aaron Marsh had made this flight dozens of times before, a route he called his therapy loop, skirting the edges of Cathedral Peak and dropping low over lesser-known basins where few boots ever touched ground. But this time was different. On a cloudless afternoon in late July, as the sun threw jagged shadows across the granite ridges, something caught his eye. A glint. Sharp, deliberate, not natural. At first he thought it might be mica, the way light sometimes plays tricks on the stone, but as he banked slightly for a second pass, he saw it again, a patch of dull red tangled in low brush, and beside it what looked like a twisted frame, half swallowed by rockfall, not big enough for a plane, too angular for a tent, and far too deep into the wilderness for a careless hiker's junk. It didn't belong. That's what stuck with him. He marked the coordinates with his GPS, snapped a series of photos on his phone through the side window, and circled once more. From above, the object seemed out of time, like a forgotten relic buried in silence. No trails led to it, no boot prints, just trees, boulders, and decades of nothing. Whatever it was had been there a long time. Back on the ground, Aaron didn't call a newspaper. He didn't post on social media. He called a ranger friend instead. "I saw something up near Echo Ridge," he said. "Something weird. Looks like gear. Old gear." The ranger hesitated. Echo Ridge wasn't on any current hiking maps. It was remote, well beyond official backcountry zones, and rarely patrolled. But when Aaron sent over the photos, the ranger went quiet. He recognized the color, that deep rust red. It was the same color listed in a long, cold missing persons case, the faded nylon of a father's backpack. A case shelved for 15 years, a father and son who vanished without a trace. The photos went to park officials, then to forensics, then to someone who hadn't spoken to the press in over a decade, and just like that, something long buried was waking up again. June 12, 2010. A Saturday. The sun rising soft and golden over the Sierra Nevada. Daniel Keller tightened the straps on his son's backpack, double-checked the water filtration kit, and looked down at the boy, smiling up at him. Ethan was 10 years old and full of questions, legs bouncing with nervous energy. This was their trip. A week alone in the wild, just father and son, no phones, no distractions, just trees, lakes, and time. The kind of time Daniel hadn't had in years. They had planned the route for months, starting at Tuolumne Meadows, tracing a loop through Rafferty Creek over Vogelsang Pass, down to Merced Lake, then back up through Echo Valley. Daniel had hiked parts of it years before the divorce, before Ethan was born. Now he wanted to share it with his son, pass something down, strength, stillness, the silence of a good trail. Park records show they checked in at 7:42 a.m. A ranger at the permit desk noted Daniel's friendly demeanor, his detailed itinerary, and how excited the boy seemed. They carried food for 8 days, a 2-man tent, rain gear, bear canisters, and a red nylon pack that Daniel had used since college. They left no note of concern, no sign of tension, only confidence, only optimism. By Sunday night, they were supposed to reach a backcountry lake. Daniel's last known text, sent from a ridgeline with spotty reception, simply read, "We're good." Beautiful out here. That was the final message. After that, silence. When the Kellers didn't return the following Friday, no one panicked. Delays in the backcountry were common, but by Sunday, when the car was still parked at the trailhead and the permit hadn't been returned, park rangers made the call. A search began. Helicopters scanned the major routes, volunteers combed the marked trails, dogs tracked faint scents that vanished into the trees. But there was no tent, no clothing, no bodies, just a trailhead log, a weather shift midweek, and 2 names that slowly sank into the soil of Yosemite's missing. Daniel Keller, age 41, Ethan Keller, age 10. A father and son who stepped into the wilderness and never came back. Daniel Keller hadn't always been the outdoors type, but after the divorce, something in him cracked open. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was grief, maybe it was the realization that time with his son was no longer a given. It had to be earned, scheduled, cherished. So he dusted off an old backpack from his college days, bought a new pair of hiking boots, and planned a trip that would fix everything, or at least patch the cracks. Ethan was growing fast, taller, quieter. 10 going on 20. The boy who once begged to ride on his father's shoulders now rolled his eyes at the mention of dad jokes. The divorce had been messy, not cruel, but raw in the way that slow breakups are, the kind that wear down love until all that's left is paperwork and silence. Daniel had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Modesto. Ethan stayed with his mom during the week. Weekends were Daniel's, but they felt more like brief visitations than real time. So when he suggested a week in Yosemite, just the two of them, no phones, no screens, no noise, Ethan surprised him. Okay, the boy said. No questions, just that one word. Daniel took it as a sign. He pored over maps, read backcountry guides, joined forums. The route he chose wasn't easy, but it wasn't reckless either. It was ambitious, scenic, challenging, but within reach. He saw it as a journey of rebuilding, each step on the trail a conversation, each mile a memory. By the end, they'd be stronger, closer whole again. Photos from the days before they left show a smiling Ethan packing his gear in the driveway, Daniel standing beside him looking proud, if a little tired, a father and son on the edge of something beautiful, or something irreversible. Neither of them knew it then, but this wasn't just a trip into the wilderness. It was a quiet goodbye to the world as they knew it. And Daniel believed, with everything in him, that he could protect his son from anything. But he didn't know what was coming. The visitor center at Tuolumne Meadows was buzzing that morning, hikers refilling water bottles, families buying maps and souvenirs. The scent of pine and sunscreen filled the air. Daniel stepped up to the counter with Ethan at his side, confident and calm. His boots were new, his pack tight. He looked prepared. Ranger Helen Coates had been working Yosemite for nearly 18 years. She'd seen every kind of hiker, thrill seekers, unprepared tourists, seasoned veterans, and everything in between. When Daniel handed her their permit form, she scanned it and frowned just slightly. Vogelsang Pass to Merced, looping back through Echo Valley, she asked. You know there's still snow on the north-facing slopes, right? Daniel nodded. Yeah, I checked satellite reports. We're planning to take it slow, camp high, and reroute if needed. Helen studied him for a beat longer than necessary. There wasn't arrogance in his voice, just conviction. Maybe that was worse. Trail crews haven't cleared the upper passes yet, she warned, and the runoff this year's been intense. Snow melts early. Streams are high, unpredictable. You cross at the wrong time, you don't get a second chance. Ethan was flipping through a brochure behind them. Daniel glanced at him, then back at the ranger. We'll be careful, he said. I've done my research. Helen sighed, initialed the permit, and handed it back. Make sure you check in when you return. And if you're behind schedule, come out the same way you came in. Don't improvise. Daniel nodded again. Got it. But the look in her eyes lingered. Not fear, not suspicion, just the quiet concern of someone who had seen too many well-meaning hikers disappear beyond the granite walls. She'd learned to trust her gut, and something about the man in front of her made it twitch. They left the visitor center around 8 a.m. Hikers would later recall seeing them near the Cathedral Lakes trailhead, Daniel adjusting his son's straps, Ethan waving playfully at a chipmunk, laughter echoing down the trail. Just a father and son heading into the wild under a sky too blue to warn them. And behind them, Ranger Coates watched the trailhead long after they'd vanished from view. Something about it just didn't sit right. The sun was just beginning to dip when Chloe and Mark Henley rounded a bend on the Cathedral Lake Trail. They were experienced hikers, quiet types, married teachers from Oregon, taking their annual summer break in the backcountry. They remembered the scene not because it seemed unusual at the time, but because later it wouldn't leave them alone. Near a rock outcrop shaped like a whale's back, just off the main trail, they spotted a man and a young boy sitting on a granite slab. The man had his boots off, massaging one foot. The boy was cross-legged, eating trail mix from a plastic bag, tossing pieces to a curious blue jay that watched from a pine branch above. The man waved as they passed, a tired, easy kind of wave. The kid looked up and smiled, chocolate stuck to his bottom lip. Chloe smiled back, noting the red nylon pack resting beside them. They looked like father and son, she told rangers later. The boy was maybe 10. He seemed safe, happy. They guessed it was around 5:15 p.m. Chloe had noticed something else, too. The father had a map unfolded in front of him, and he seemed to be tracing something with his finger. Slowly, carefully, like he wasn't sure of the next step. Mark had made a joke as they walked past. "Still lost in paradise?" The man chuckled. "Aren't we all?" he replied. That was it. Just a brief encounter in the golden hour, another quiet moment in the wilderness. Chloe and Mark didn't think about it again until the missing posters went up. When rangers contacted them weeks later, they were certain it was the same pair. No other sightings came in, no photos surfaced, no campsites were confirmed. Just that one interaction, a boy with sticky fingers, a man with sore feet, a family disappearing behind a bend in the trail, never seen again. They were supposed to be back by Sunday. That was the plan. According to Daniel's permit, he and Ethan would exit the Echo Valley Loop by early afternoon, check back in at the Tuolumne Meadows Visitor Center, and drive home by nightfall. Ethan's mother, Lisa, wasn't worried at first. It was summer. Delays happened. Maybe they decided to spend one more night under the stars. But when Monday came and there was no word, no call, no text, no knock at the door, something in her stomach turned. Daniel was a lot of things, distracted, stubborn, a little too proud, but he wasn't careless. Not with Ethan. By Tuesday morning, she called the park. Ranger Helen Coates was the one who picked up. She remembered them instantly. The man with the confident voice, the boy with the eager eyes. She checked the return log. No signature. Daniel Keller's name was still listed as active. Within the hour, a patrol drove to the trailhead. The car was still there, dust-covered but undisturbed. Inside, 2 water bottles, a half-eaten granola bar, and a crumpled paper itinerary with hand-sketched notations in Daniel's handwriting. Their exit date circled in red, June 20th. That's when the gears started to turn. By noon, the Yosemite Search and Rescue Team was activated. A helicopter did a quick sweep of the main loop. Nothing. No movement, no brightly colored tent, no sign of distress. Back in Modesto, Lisa waited by the phone, refreshing her inbox, checking Ethan's location sharing, even though she knew it wouldn't work out there. She opened his last message, sent the day they left. Just a thumbs-up emoji and a blurry picture of the trailhead. It wasn't like Daniel to go off-grid. It wasn't like Ethan not to come home. By Tuesday evening, park rangers made it official. Daniel Keller and his son Ethan were missing. Somewhere out there in 750,000 acres of rock, forest, and water, 2 figures had simply vanished into silence. And no one, not even the ones trained to find the lost, had the faintest idea where to begin. The first helicopter lifted off before dawn, a Bell 407 outfitted with thermal imaging and high-res cameras. Its blades cut through the stillness of Yosemite's backcountry, the whir echoing across valleys that hadn't heard a human voice in days. Inside, park rangers scanned the ground for color, bright clothing, reflective gear, movement, anything. Nothing. By mid-morning, more resources arrived. The Yosemite Search and Rescue Team, YOSAR, brought in ground crews, scent dogs, and a mobile command center. Volunteers were called in from nearby counties. The operation ramped up fast. They had to. The first 48 hours were everything. Maps were spread across tables. Radios buzzed. Helicopters pulsed overhead like mechanical heartbeats. The terrain was brutal. Granite cliffs disguised as hills, narrow switchbacks that vanished into tree cover, sudden drop-offs that swallowed noise and light. The trails Daniel had listed on his itinerary looped through some of the most beautiful and unforgiving wilderness in the country. Waterways ran high and fast. Snow still clung to shaded gullies. The forest here didn't give up secrets easily. Teams searched the obvious routes first: Cathedral Lakes, Vogelsang Pass, Echo Valley. They looked for campsites, cairns, footprints, trash. They found nothing, not a sleeping bag, not a scrap of clothing, not even a boot print. One dog alerted near a log bridge, but the scent trail evaporated just a few feet away. The river there was fast, swollen with snowmelt, the kind of current that could carry something far, or nowhere at all. As night fell, a quiet realization began to settle over the crew. This wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't going to be quick. Two people, even with experience, even with gear, could disappear in this wilderness and stay gone for years. Back at command, a ranger quietly folded Ethan's permit copy into a Ziploc and placed it in the active case file. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew the truth. Yosemite had taken people before, and it never gave them back easily. The vehicle was a silver 2007 Toyota Sienna parked neatly between the faded white lines at the Cathedral Lakes trailhead. Dust coated the windshield. A park entry pass was still visible on the dashboard, fluttering slightly each time the wind passed through the canyon. It had been sitting there for 9 days. Inside, the air was stale and dry. A pair of sunglasses rested in the center console. On the passenger seat, a dog-eared copy of A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson, pages creased and marked. In the glove box, maps, sunscreen, 2 granola wrappers. But it was what they found tucked behind the driver's seat that stopped the ranger cold. A folded paper worn soft from being opened and reopened. It wasn't a topo map. It was a handwritten note, addressed to Lisa. "If something happens to me, make sure Ethan gets home. He's stronger than I ever was. Tell him I'm proud, always." No signature, no date, just the words. Nearby was a detailed route plan, marked with Daniel's meticulous handwriting. Elevation notations, campsite preferences, stream crossings he intended to avoid, all of it carefully drawn, all of it now part of an active investigation. The car was towed, impounded as evidence. Inside, forensics lifted a few fingerprints, Daniel's, Ethan's, no one else's. No sign of struggle, no damage, no blood, no suggestion they'd ever return to the vehicle. But the note shifted the narrative. This hadn't just been a trip. It had been a turning point. Whether Daniel knew something was going to happen or feared it might, no one could say for certain. Maybe it was just precaution. A father's worst-case scenario scrawled out in a quiet moment of doubt. Or maybe, somehow, he'd seen the end before it came. Either way, the van stayed parked. Just like the trailhead register, still missing Daniel's exit signature. Just like the radio calls that went unanswered. Just like the forest itself, still, wide, and unbothered by the absence of 2 people it had swallowed whole. The search went on for 19 days. Air and ground, dogs and drones, every mile combed, every ravine checked twice. But the wilderness gave nothing back, no footprints, no torn fabric, no disturbed brush. The kind of disappearance that left too much room for possibility. And possibility became fuel. Did Daniel fall? Some believed he'd slipped on one of the exposed granite ridges, maybe while filtering water or scouting ahead. If he fell, maybe Ethan tried to get help. Maybe the boy got lost. Maybe he never made it far at all. That theory felt logical, clean. But it didn't explain the total absence of gear. Not a single item turned up. Others suspected wildlife. A mountain lion, maybe. A bear. Yosemite has both, and both have taken people before. But search dogs would have picked up the scent. There would have been signs, blood, drag marks, clothing. But there was nothing, not even a crushed water bottle. Some whispered about Daniel's mental state. The note in the van, cryptic, emotional, left too much open to interpretation. Had he planned something darker? A murder-suicide in the wild? A father pushed too far, deciding that if he couldn't have custody, he'd take his son into the mountains and vanish together. But people who knew Daniel pushed back hard. He loved Ethan more than life, his sister told reporters. He wouldn't have hurt him. Not ever. Still, investigators couldn't ignore it. They pulled phone records, interviewed friends, family, co-workers. Nothing suspicious. No debts, no threats, no signs of instability. Then came the wilder ideas. A woman in Fresno claimed she'd seen Ethan at a rest stop weeks later. A man from Bishop said he'd heard a child screaming near a river bend one night, but never went to check. Someone sent an anonymous tip about Daniel trying to escape the system, possibly hiding out in Idaho. Rangers logged it all. Followed up where they could. Most of it went nowhere. But the wildest theory came from the silence itself. That maybe it wasn't a fall or a bear or a decision. Maybe they simply vanished, like the mountain took them back. The search was officially suspended on July 5, 2010. It had been 23 days since Daniel and Ethan Keller stepped onto the trail, and into something no one could trace. The final report from Yosemite Search and Rescue was clinical, almost sterile in tone. No additional clues located. Terrain extensively searched. All known leads exhausted. Status: unresolved. Privately, rangers were frustrated. They'd thrown everything at the case: teams, tech, time. The dogs had hit nothing. The drones saw only trees and stone. The helicopters scanned hundreds of square miles. Every ridge, every basin, every dry riverbed. They checked known animal dens, looked for disturbed soil, studied game camera footage. Nothing. The Keller family held out hope longer than most. Lisa posted missing flyers every month for a year. Hired private trackers, talked to mediums. One psychic claimed she saw Ethan sitting under a pine tree with his shoes off. It gave Lisa hope for a week, until the woman asked for $3,000 to continue the search. After that, the phone calls stopped. Every missing persons case reaches a point where hope becomes a question mark. The posters fade, the news coverage dries up, the public attention drifts, the trail grows cold, not by decision, but by gravity. Resources pull away, other emergencies take priority, and the forest, always patient, waits to be forgotten. The Keller file was moved to long-term archives, a yellow tag placed on the box: missing, unresolved, last contact June 2010. No funeral was ever held, no memorial. Lisa refused. No bodies, no closure, she said. For years after, hikers would still ask rangers about the boy and his dad. Some said they thought about them on certain trails, especially Echo Valley. A quiet ache in the middle of the wild, a reminder that even the best prepared can vanish. That sometimes the forest doesn't offer resolution, just questions, endless, echoing questions. And so the file sat, gathering dust, until 15 years later, when a glint of red in the high country caught the eye of a passing pilot. And everything changed. Lisa never believed the story was over. Even after the official search ended, after the news vans left, after the sympathy cards stopped arriving, and the casseroles dried up, she couldn't let go. Not of the hope, not of the questions, and certainly not of Ethan. In the corner of her living room, a wall had transformed. What used to be a reading nook became something else entirely. Maps of Yosemite layered with red pins, elevation charts, weather data from June 2010, park ranger reports printed and highlighted, a shelf lined with binders, each labeled with the date of a new tip. Above it all, taped at the center, a school photo of Ethan in a blue polo, smiling wide, baby teeth still visible. Beneath it, Daniel's note, creased, yellowing, protected behind plastic. "Tell him I'm proud, always." Some nights she sat there until morning, rereading the same fragments, listening to old voicemails just to hear his voice. She kept his room exactly the way he left it. Superman blanket folded, hiking boots by the door, a trail guide to Yosemite resting on the nightstand, bookmarked on a page about Echo Valley. She didn't believe the clean explanations, not really. If Daniel had died out there, she reasoned, someone would have found him, a bone, a buckle, anything. And Ethan, her Ethan. He would have tried to get out. He would have walked until his legs gave out. He wouldn't have disappeared. Not like that. So she kept looking. When technology caught up, she bought a drone. She joined online forums filled with search and rescue hobbyists, true crime obsessives, armchair cartographers. She posted photos, shared coordinates, chased every comment that began with, "Have you tried?" People told her to move on, that grief needed an endpoint. But Lisa didn't want closure. She wanted her son back. And until she had an answer, the wall stayed up. The first one came in 2011. A woman hiking near Mono Pass claimed she saw a man and a boy with mismatched gear moving through the tree line. The boy had a red pack. She couldn't say more. She never saw their faces. Another came in 2013. Someone reported a possible Daniel Keller sighting at a gas station in Nevada. The man bought supplies, paid in cash, and left. The camera footage was grainy. The image could have been anyone. But Lisa watched it on repeat for weeks. In 2015, the tip that nearly broke her. A hunter, deep in the Sierra backcountry, claimed he spotted a boy near a fire ring just after dusk. Said the kid looked about 10 or 12, with shaggy hair and old boots. Said he didn't get a good look, and when he called out, the boy ran, disappeared into the trees. The hunter marked the location, somewhere near Lost Canyon. Rangers followed up. A team hiked in. They found the fire ring half collapsed with charred wood no more than a few days old. No footprints, no gear, no boy. Lisa held on to that one for a long time. She started to believe Ethan had survived, that maybe Daniel hadn't made it, but Ethan had. Maybe he'd gotten out, or been found, or taken. She didn't say it out loud, but the thought crept in. Maybe someone had found him and never reported it. Maybe he'd been raised off-grid, taught to forget who he was. Theories began to shift, from survival to something stranger. She got letters, too, handwritten, sloppy. "Your son is alive." One included a GPS coordinate that led to a dead-end service road near Fresno. Another had a Bible verse circled in red. "The child is not dead, but asleep." Each one chipped away at her, not because they were convincing, but because someone, somewhere, knew how to keep hope alive, and how to use it against her. The sheriff's office logged the tips. Rangers followed what they could. Most were dismissed. But none were forgotten. Not by Lisa, not by the investigators who still thought about the case, and not by the wilderness that had stayed silent through it all. Because silence, in a place like Yosemite, doesn't mean nothing's out there. It was July 2017 when it surfaced. 7 years after Daniel and Ethan vanished, long after most had stopped searching. A fly fisherman named Carl Duggan made a quiet discovery that would pull the case back into the light. He was deep in Yosemite's northeast backcountry, where the river turns sharp and the canyon walls close in. The kind of place no one visits by accident. He'd bushwhacked in from the east, chasing a stretch of river known for rainbow trout. The current was low, summer dry, and the rocks were slick underfoot. That's when he saw it, something wedged beneath a fallen log near the far bank. At first he thought it was trash, but as he waded closer, he saw the shape more clearly, a backpack, faded red, child-sized, half buried in silt and moss, as if the river had tried to keep it hidden. He pulled it out and set it on a flat stone. The fabric was torn, zippers rusted, but inside, things were remarkably intact. A cracked compass, 2 granola bar wrappers, and a laminated emergency contact card with Ethan Keller's name written in blue ink. Carl hiked out the next morning and brought the bag to park rangers. DNA confirmed it within a week. It was Ethan's. The news hit like a shockwave. After 7 years of silence, It was the first real clue. The Keller file was reopened. Helicopters were dispatched. Ground teams combed the area. But the backpack raised more questions than it answered. There were no footprints, no broken branches, no sign of a camp, shelter, or fire. The location was wrong, miles off the planned route, down a canyon that wasn't even marked on Daniel's map. How had it gotten there? Did the river carry it? Had someone else found it and moved it? Or had Ethan made it that far on his own? The bag was logged, tagged, and stored in evidence. The trail camera installed nearby never picked up anything else, just birds, deer, and wind in the grass. But Lisa visited the site later that summer. She sat by the water and stared at the log where it was found. He was here, she whispered. He was alive. By 2018, the story had begun to change. The backpack discovery didn't just reopen the case. It reawakened the mystery. Online forums reignited. Reddit threads exploded. YouTube sleuths dissected every detail. And somewhere among the theories, one rumor refused to die. The Hermit. Locals called him the Ghost of Echo Ridge. A man seen moving through the forest alone, always at dusk, always silent. No known campsite, no confirmed photos, just stories. Hikers said they'd glimpsed him from afar, tall, bearded, carrying a bow, always moving westward before disappearing into the trees. Some said he'd been there for years, that he survived off what the land gave, that he avoided all contact and sometimes left no tracks behind. But after the backpack was found, the stories changed. A woman hiking alone near Glen Allen claimed she saw him watching her from a ridge, said she called out, and he turned, but didn't answer. She said his eyes were hollow, not angry, not lost, just empty. Another man reported a figure fitting the description near Roosevelt Lake. Said he was hunched over a fire, boiling something in a tin can. When approached, the man vanished, like smoke in the trees. The sightings weren't taken seriously at first, until one detail kept repeating, the man was always seen near water, and always alone. Rangers logged the accounts, quietly. No official search was mounted. After all, living off-grid isn't illegal in Yosemite, not unless there's a crime. But some began to ask, could Daniel have survived? It wasn't impossible. He had wilderness training, knew how to navigate. Maybe he'd been injured. Maybe he'd gone feral. Maybe the trauma had broken something in him, and he'd chosen to stay lost. Lisa didn't know what to believe. If he's alive, she said once, then where's Ethan? Others took a darker view. Maybe the Hermit wasn't Daniel. Maybe it was someone else, someone who found them, someone who didn't want to be found. One ranger, speaking anonymously, said it best. You spend enough time in the backcountry, you start to believe in things, not magic, just possibility. And possibility can be terrifying. So the ghost of Echo Ridge remained just that, unconfirmed, untouched, a shadow on the edge of the trail, and still no sign of Ethan. By the time the 10th year passed, Lisa wasn't just grieving, she was searching. She'd quit her job in 2019, packed her life into storage, sold her car, bought a used Jeep with off-road tires, and moved into a rented cabin just outside Mariposa. From there, every trailhead was within reach, every shadowed ridge, every unmarked spur, every forgotten deer trail was hers to chase. She joined hiking groups under a fake name, took wilderness survival courses, learned how to read animal tracks and weather signs, bought maps by the dozen, and stitched her own versions together, cross-referencing ranger logs and digital terrain models. She wasn't just hiking Yosemite anymore, she was mapping it, emotionally, spiritually, obsessively. The rangers began to notice. They started calling her the mother who won't give up, not unkindly, just truthfully. She showed up at the permit desk every few weeks, never smiled, always polite, always alone. Sometimes she asked about old zones, places rangers hadn't visited in years. Other times, she dropped off coordinates. I saw something strange there, she'd say. Might be nothing. But it might not. They humored her at first, then they started listening. Lisa logged over 800 trail miles in 3 years. Her knees gave out, more than once. She broke 2 fingers falling on talus above Tenaya Canyon. Once she ran out of water in late August and was found barely conscious by a pair of climbers near Snow Creek Falls. She never stopped. In her pack she carried the same photo of Ethan, the same compass he kept in his red backpack, the same copy of Daniel's note, now laminated, creased, and taped to her trail map. "I'm not crazy," she told a ranger once. "I'm just his mother. And if I don't look for him, who will?" There was no answer to that, only the sound of pine trees whispering in the wind, and the quiet knowledge that love, real love, isn't always soft. Sometimes it's jagged, sometimes it breaks you open, sometimes it drives you deep into a wilderness that never answers back. By 2025, the world had moved on. The headlines were gone. The forums had gone quiet. But Lisa hadn't. 15 years. 15 birthdays, 15 Christmases, 15 empty seats at the table. Ethan would have been 25 that summer, a man now, if he were alive. Daniel would have been 56. Lisa tried to imagine what they'd look like. She couldn't. The official anniversary came and went with no press coverage, no vigils, no headlines, only a short email from the Park Service. "Case remains open. No new developments. Our thoughts are with you." That was it. But inside Yosemite, the calendar mattered. Rangers remembered the date. Some visited the trailhead at Cathedral Lakes that morning, quietly, privately, left no flowers, just paused, looked into the trees, and moved on. Lisa didn't mark the date with ceremony. She spent it hiking alone, up past Fletcher Lake, toward an unmarked basin she'd found on an old Forest Service map. The air was thin, cold. Snow still clung to shaded patches beneath the cliffs. She didn't expect to find anything, but she walked slowly, scanning the ridgelines, the brush, the spaces between shadows. She still believed. Not in miracles exactly, just in answers. She believed the wilderness wasn't done speaking yet, that maybe, just maybe, there was something still out there, a shred of fabric, a snapped branch, a jawbone buried beneath the pine needles. She'd come to understand that closure doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it just means knowing. And for Lisa Keller, that was enough to keep going. 15 years gone. No footprints, no bodies, no resolution. Just a story with too many blank pages. And a mother still writing the next one step at a time. Aaron Marsh wasn't supposed to be flying that day. It was a last-minute detour, an itch to get above it all, to escape the stifling heat rolling through the Central Valley. He fueled up his Cessna 182 just after sunrise, filed a casual VFR plan, and pointed the nose toward the high country. No destination, just sky. Flying had always been his way of thinking. Some people meditated. Aaron climbed. Altitude gave him clarity. By late morning, he was cutting across the northern edge of Yosemite, following the curvature of an old glacial basin carved into the rock like a forgotten fingerprint. He'd flown over this stretch before, but something about the light caught his attention. The basin was barren, rimmed by jagged cliffs and snow patches that clung to life deep into summer. No trails, no campsites, nothing but stone and silence. Then, just for a second, something glinted. He banked hard left, brought the Cessna lower, slower. It wasn't a reflection from water. It was sharper, more angular, man-made. The kind of shine that metal doesn't lose, even after years exposed to the elements. Just beneath the edge of a snowfield, wedged between boulders, something was catching the sun. Aaron looped again, squinting through the haze. That's when he saw it more clearly. Something red, faded, sun-bleached, but still visible against the gray-white rock. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't new. He snapped a few photos through the window. Not great, blurred by the curve of the glass, but enough. He marked the GPS coordinates, circled the basin once more, and then pulled up sharply, climbing toward clearer air. He didn't know it yet, but he had just flown over a place no human had set foot in years, maybe longer. And what he saw, what shimmered just long enough to catch his eye, was about to reopen a case that had lived too long in silence. Aaron didn't go to the press. He went to someone who would listen. Back on the ground, he sent the GPS coordinates and the photos to his friend Casey, a seasonal ranger stationed in Tuolumne. "Might be junk," he wrote, but something about it felt off. Casey opened the images on her laptop, expecting nothing. But her breath caught on the third photo. The metal was visible now, barely, but it looked like part of a stove frame, the kind used in lightweight backpacking kits. The shape wasn't right for anything modern, bent, corroded, scorched along one edge. But it was the red that froze her. Just behind the metal, a strip of fabric, torn, tangled around a boulder, a familiar red, a child's backpack. She zoomed in, enhanced the contrast, ran it through image stabilization software. The resolution was poor, but the geometry matched, a wide patch with a rounded seam. Not trash, not a jacket, a pack. And that shade of red had been etched into her memory since 2010. She forwarded the files up the chain. Within hours, the Park Service dispatched a drone team. The basin wasn't accessible by trail, not even close. The nearest approach was a multi-day hike through uneven terrain and uncharted slope. But the drone confirmed what the photos only hinted at. More debris scattered across the rocks, a length of cord, a torn stuff sack, another glimpse of red. Officials didn't say much at first, just that they were investigating a possible equipment-related discovery linked to an inactive missing persons case. But Lisa knew. When a ranger called her that evening, there was no hesitation in her voice. "Where?" she asked. The pause on the other end said everything. They were back in it. 15 years of questions. And now, maybe finally, answers buried in a basin no one had ever searched. The mountain had been holding its secret, and now it was letting it go. The National Park Service doesn't reopen cold cases lightly, especially not ones buried under 15 years of silence, especially not in Yosemite, where more than 30 people are still listed as missing. Most never found. Most never even searched for beyond the first week. But this was different. The images from Aaron Marsh's flight weren't just compelling, they were specific. Man-made objects. Equipment consistent with 2010-era backpacking gear, red nylon fabric, metal cookware, nothing recent, no modern boot prints, no trash, wrappers, or camp tags that might have pointed to someone else. Everything about it felt frozen in time. So, quietly, cautiously, the case was reopened. No press release, no media leaks. Internally, they called it a status re-evaluation. Publicly, they said nothing, but Lisa was notified. She'd waited 15 years for a call like that, and when it finally came, she barely breathed. A drone was sent first, light, fast, silent. It launched from a ranger base at dawn, flying low along the ridge line toward the coordinates Aaron had marked. Wind gusted against it, thin and wild at that altitude. The signal flickered as it dipped below a granite lip, but the feed held. What it captured changed everything. There was more than fabric and metal. There were patterns, lines of gear scattered across a slope, an old tarp caught on a tree, something white and flat that might have once been paper, and something else, further upslope, a collapsed structure, makeshift, possibly a shelter, now mostly stone and ash. But the final image was the one that stuck. A boot, child-sized, half buried in scree, just sitting there, alone. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough. The order went out that afternoon. Assemble a team, hike in, make contact with the site. They didn't know what they'd find, only that the mountain was finally whispering back. It took 3 days to reach the basin. No trails led there, the route carved through switchbacks that hadn't been maintained in years, then disappeared into raw, unmarked country, steep shale slopes, deadfall-choked corridors, and ravines scarred by snowmelt and time. This wasn't a path meant for rescue. It wasn't meant for anyone. 6 team members went in, all seasoned. 2 rangers, 1 forensic anthropologist, a backcountry medic, and 2 mountain rescue volunteers who'd been on the original 2010 search. The mood was quiet, focused. Everyone knew what was at stake. By day 2, the team had already commented on the strangeness of the area. "We've never searched this zone," one ranger said. "It wasn't on any original map. I don't even think it was considered reachable." That was the problem. Back in 2010, Daniel's route plan had been dismissed as overly ambitious, but safe. Standard. The original search grid focused on his marked itinerary. But this basin? It was nearly 10 miles off the expected loop and separated by terrain that most hikers wouldn't even attempt without ropes. Why had Daniel gone this way? By late afternoon on day 3, they arrived at the site. Immediately, the air changed. Still, dense. The drone footage hadn't captured the feeling of the place, how quiet it was, how untouched, how wrong. They found the fabric first, still caught on the rock. Then the rusted frame of what had once been a jet boil stove. Then the tarp, torn through the center, brittle with age. And finally the boot, smaller than expected, faded, but unmistakably a child's. They marked everything, photographed, measured, logged GPS data. The medic knelt near the edge of a flat rock platform and cleared away a scattering of leaves. That's when he saw it. Bone. The call went out over radio. "We have contact." "Repeat, we have confirmed human remains." Everyone stood still. No one spoke for a long time. 15 years of silence, and now at last the mountain was beginning to answer. The shelter wasn't much, just a crude lean-to collapsed in on itself, timber scavenged from windfall, rocks stacked to form a windbreak. Most of the roof had rotted away, peeled back by years of snow and sun, but beneath it there were signs of something more human, more desperate. A rusted survival knife lay buried under pine needles near the fire ring, its handle cracked, blade spotted with age. Beside it, a clump of melted plastic and ash, likely remnants of a rain poncho or bag. Inside the lean-to, the search team found bones. Not many, just enough to suggest someone had stayed here until they couldn't anymore. But there was only room for one. The team paused, studied the layout, the position of the stones, the shallow fire pit, the way the roof angled in low, too low for 2 people to have slept inside. No child's belongings, no extra bedroll, no second toothbrush, just one person surviving as long as they could. It was a camp built by someone who expected company, but only ever received silence. Then, near the rear of the shelter, tucked beneath a rust-stained mess kit, one of the rangers found a plastic bag, torn, weather-worn. Inside, wrapped in layers of damp clothing, was a notebook. Faded leather cover, water-stained edges, the first few pages fused together, but there was writing inside. A name was etched on the front flap in black ink, Daniel Keller. The team gathered around it, heads low, as the forensic tech gently flipped through the pages with gloved hands. What hadn't been destroyed by time had been preserved by cold, shade, and luck. There were words, dates, and the beginnings of a story no one was prepared to hear. The first legible page was dated July the 1st, 2010, 9 days after Daniel and Ethan were supposed to exit the trail. "Fell near the ridge," it read, "slipped on loose rock. Ankles gone. Might be broken. Can't tell. Hurts to breathe. Don't want Ethan to see me scared." The handwriting was shaky. Ink bled from water damage, but the message was clear. They'd gone off route, possibly trying to shortcut back toward the valley, but something had gone wrong. Very wrong. Further in, the entries grew more erratic, time blurred, sentences fragmented. Shelters holding. Cold at night. Coyotes nearby, not sure if he sleeps. Keeps looking at me like I have answers. Another page. Food's low. Stove cracked. Boiling water over fire now. Ethan's quiet, strong, just like his mom. Then, on a page dated around July 3rd, the tone shifted. "I'm sending him." The entry was longer, more focused, almost lucid. "I can't move." Not far. My legs useless, swelling up bad. Fever comes in waves. Ethan keeps asking when we'll leave. I told him tomorrow, but I know the truth. If I don't send him now, we both die here. He described packing Ethan's bag, giving him a compass, marking the route on an old map, telling him to follow the creek south until he saw power lines or a road, telling him to keep going no matter what. He didn't want to go. Cried. I cried too. I told him he could do this, that I'd be right behind him. I lied. I don't think I'll make it through another night. The final legible line was scrawled crooked across the bottom margin. If someone finds this, please tell Lisa I tried. He's brave. He's so brave. No more pages after that. Just blank sheets stuck together by mold and time. The team stood in silence. They knew what it meant. Daniel had stayed behind. Ethan had gone alone. And somewhere beyond this camp, a 10-year-old boy had walked into the wild, chasing survival with nothing but a compass, a trail, and the last promise his father ever gave him. They found the jacket 2 miles downslope from the shelter. Tattered, sun-bleached, torn at the sleeve. It had been caught in the roots of a stunted pine, as if it had snagged on the way down and simply stayed, fluttering faintly in the high country wind. Faded blue nylon lined with fleece, child-sized. It was Ethan's. 100 yards ahead, the trail disappeared into a narrow canyon. There had once been a wooden bridge there, long since collapsed. Only the stone pilings remained, jutting out like broken teeth over the chasm. The drop below wasn't dramatic, maybe 15 feet, but the river at the bottom ran fast, fed by snowmelt, bitter cold, jagged rocks lining the edge. The team spread out carefully. They followed a shallow slope around the canyon's rim, staying alert for anything, a footprint, a scrap of fabric, bone. That's when the medic spotted it from above, a flash of red beside the river, not a pack, not clothing, something more final. The descent was steep, treacherous. Even with ropes, it took them nearly an hour to reach the riverbed. There, beneath a sloping granite wall, was a shape, small, still, pressed against the stone, as if he had curled into it for warmth, his body partially sheltered by a natural alcove, one shoe missing, jacket gone. But the pants matched the ones described in the 2010 missing persons file, cargo style, with a tear in the left knee. And in his hand, gripped impossibly tight even after all these years, was a silver compass, the same one from his red backpack. The cold had preserved him. 15 winters had come and gone, snow piling up in the canyon, ice swallowing the river. But Ethan was there, intact enough to be identified, not just by the compass, but by dental records, DNA, and the small scar above his right eyebrow, still faintly visible beneath time's erosion. The forensic team believed he'd fallen attempting to cross the collapsed bridge, likely slipped, tumbled down the rock face, and struck his head on the way down. There were no signs of foul play, no defensive wounds, just a fractured skull and silence. They believe he lived at least 2 days after leaving his father. 2 days of walking alone. 2 days of navigating wild terrain with only instinct and a child's understanding of a map. He stayed close to water, followed the route his father had traced, kept moving. He had almost made it. The rescue team stood in reverent silence. One ranger knelt by his side and whispered something no one else heard. Later, they wrapped him in a thermal recovery blanket and carried him out by hand. No helicopters, no press. Just boots on the ground and the long walk home. Lisa was waiting when they returned. She asked to see him, just once. They gave her space. She sat with him for a long time. When she finally stood, she didn't cry. She just said softly, "He did exactly what his dad asked. He tried." She took the compass home with her. It still worked. They returned to the shelter 3 days after recovering Ethan. The team had intentionally left it undisturbed, part out of respect, part out of necessity. Now, with forensic clearance and improved weather, they could finish the work. Daniel was still there, tucked beneath the lean-to, wrapped in what was left of a thermal blanket. His body had deteriorated more than Ethan's, exposed to the elements, subjected to time, but the positioning told its own story. one arm across his chest, the other outstretched, as if reaching for something just out of reach. Near his side, wedged between two rocks, was the rest of the journal. A few more pages, mostly illegible. Ink run wild. Water had warped the paper, turning most of the words into shadows. But one entry had survived, scrawled larger, darker, as if he knew it would be the last. I hear him calling, but I can't go. There was no date, no punctuation, just those 8 words written in a trembling hand. No one said anything as the words were read aloud. Daniel had lived long enough to hear his son trying to return, or dreaming he had. Maybe Ethan had turned back at some point, calling into the wind. Maybe it was a hallucination, a fevered echo, or maybe it was real. Either way, Daniel knew he couldn't answer. He'd made the call no parent ever wants to make, sending a child alone into the wilderness, and then he waited for a sound, for a rescue, for redemption. None came, only silence, and the knowing weight that he would die there in the place he had chosen to try and save his son. When they carried him out, one ranger whispered, "He stayed until the end." No one disagreed. Daniel Keller never made it home, but his son almost did. When the reports came in, when the full picture was finally mapped, it was impossible not to ask, how? How could they have been so close yet completely overlooked? How could 2 people vanish in a park, searched by helicopters, dogs, and dozens of trained professionals? The answer was brutal in its simplicity. The original 2010 search grids were built using outdated terrain models, maps last updated in the late 90s, based on satellite data that missed key changes in elevation and runoff zones. In 2010, digital cartography was still catching up. The blind spot where the shelter was built and the river crossing failed didn't even exist on the maps used during the first weeks of the search. In other words, Daniel and Ethan had crossed into a zone no one thought to check. It was a logistical ghost. The area was deemed too far, too unlikely, too difficult to reach without ropes. The assumption was simple. They wouldn't have gone that way. But they had. A later analysis confirmed it. They likely made a wrong turn after a washed-out trail sign. With Daniel injured and trying to avoid climbing, they diverted east, hugging the ridgeline. It bought them time, but it also sealed their fate. Search teams had passed within 4 miles of their camp. Helicopters flew over twice, but too high, too fast, and at the wrong angle to see the hidden basin tucked between folds of stone. They were there the entire time. Lisa said later, "It's like they walked off the edge of the map," and no one noticed. The experts agreed. The Keller case would go on to reshape search and rescue grid planning nationwide. New tools, updated maps, better terrain modeling. Too late for Daniel. Too late for Ethan. But maybe not for the next person who vanishes in the wild. The news broke before the bodies were even back in town. By the time the story hit national outlets, it had already gone viral online. Headlines surged across the internet, carried by true crime forums and hiking communities before spilling into prime time. Father and son found after 15 years missing in Yosemite. Final journal reveals tragic survival attempt. 10-year-old died a hero, clutching compass in hand. Photos of Daniel and Ethan were everywhere. School portraits, vacation snapshots, the grainy image from the 2010 permit desk. News anchors spoke in hushed tones, playing drone footage of the search site, showing red fabric caught on rock, the boot near the riverbed. The journal quote, "I hear him calling, but I can't go," was repeated like a prayer. Memes, tributes, TikToks, podcasts. Everyone had an opinion. Some called Daniel a hero. Others questioned his judgment. Some tried to reverse engineer his route, speculating how close he'd come to salvation. A few accused the park of negligence, and others, predictably, turned to conspiracy, UFOs, secret cults, wilderness spirits, the usual noise. Lisa didn't respond to interview requests. She turned her phone off the day the news broke and didn't turn it back on for weeks. She watched the headlines from a distance, mostly through second-hand mentions. She didn't need the spotlight. She had the truth. And the truth didn't comfort her. It carved into her. There was no reunion, no dramatic rescue, no last-minute miracle. There was only a compass, a trail that ended in silence, and a journal entry she could never unread. The media called it closure. Lisa didn't. Closure implies peace. What she had was confirmation. The thing she feared most, the image that haunted her in the quietest hours, had turned out to be real. Ethan alone in the wild, dying with no one there to hold his hand, and Daniel broken in a shelter, unable to reach his son. She didn't need a headline. She just needed time. The criticism came fast. For years, Yosemite had operated with a sense of pride in its safety record. But the Keller discovery sparked a wave of scrutiny from the public, the media, and from within. Suddenly, the cracks were too wide to ignore. The outdated maps, the narrow search grids. The fact that a 10-year-old boy and his father had been overlooked for over a decade, just miles from the original route, was unacceptable. So the park responded, quietly at first, then loudly. A task force was formed to review all open missing persons cases in the park. Each one was reassessed using modern LIDAR data and advanced terrain modeling. Search grids were remapped, old assumptions retested. Yosemite introduced a GPS loaner program, a small initiative at first, now available to all solo hikers and family groups entering the backcountry. Devices would ping location every 30 minutes, no cell service required. Data could be retrieved in emergencies. Participation wasn't mandatory, but highly encouraged. Rangers began training in advanced SAR grid modeling and wilderness psychology, learning to predict the kinds of choices people make when lost, hurt, or afraid. Trails were reevaluated, some rerouted, warning signs updated. And at the Cathedral Lakes trailhead, near the spot where the van once sat collecting dust, a small plaque was installed. In memory of Daniel and Ethan Keller, lost in 2010, found in 2025. May we search smarter, walk safer, and never forget those still waiting to be found. The plaque was simple. The lessons were not. Lisa was invited to speak at the dedication. She declined. She didn't need a platform. She had her son's compass, still hanging in her cabin window, always pointing north. Yosemite kept moving, but part of it would always belong to the Kellers now. Not in tragedy, in memory. Weeks after the discovery, as Yosemite's backcountry quieted again and the headlines faded, a ranger named Miguel Cortez sat in the evidence room reading through Daniel Keller's journal again. He'd read it half a dozen times already, most had. But something kept pulling at him, a detail, a fragment. In one of the earlier entries, one that had survived the water damage, Daniel had written, "Wrote it all down last night. If something happens, page 19 has it all. Every step, every thought." Miguel flipped through the pages again, slowly, carefully. Page 18, intact. Page 20, still partially legible. Page 19 was gone. Not damaged. Removed. The seam was clean, torn down the spine as if someone had deliberately taken it. The paper hadn't rotted or disintegrated. It had been lifted by wind or wildlife or someone else. Maybe by Daniel himself, maybe not. Miguel stared at the empty space. What had Daniel written that night, alone, injured, waiting for help that never came? What was on the page he thought mattered most? And why wasn't it there anymore? The missing page became more than a curiosity. It became a question. One more silence layered atop a decade of silence. Maybe it was just thoughts, too painful to leave behind. Maybe it was a confession, or maybe it held a truth no one would ever be able to prove. Some say trauma can reshape memory. Others say the wilderness does the same to time, that in places like this, days blur and thoughts unravel, and what's left behind isn't always the full story. The journal ended with love, but what it didn't say might matter just as much. And that's how the case ended, not with a solved mystery, but with a space where something should have been. A torn-out page, a final silence, a story unfinished. Not all questions have answers. That's something you learn in wilderness. The mountain doesn't care about closure. The river doesn't stop to explain where it's been. The trees don't speak names, and the wind, when it moves through high basins and forgotten valleys, carries only fragments. Daniel and Ethan Keller died in 2010. That part finally is known. But how they survived as long as they did, what they said to each other in the final days, what Daniel wrote, then removed, and what Ethan saw before he fell, that part is gone, buried under snow, or folded into the rock, or scattered in the pine needles along the boys' last trail. Lisa keeps the compass. She hikes still, not to find but to remember. Sometimes she stops on a ridge and listens, not for voices, but for the sound of the world turning, for the breath of the forest, for the place where her son's footsteps stopped, and where the wind keeps walking. Some stories stay with us not because they're whole, but because they never will be. And maybe that's the point. The forest keeps secrets, but it also keeps memories. And somewhere, in that wide silence between stone and sky, the Kellers are part of it now. Not lost. Just there. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.